I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I'll begin introductions with Mr. Whitmore and ask that everyone follow in accordance with your seat at the board table.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Andy Whitmore, Assistant Superintendent for Finance and Operations.
Good evening and welcome. I'm Nerlanda Anselm, Assistant Superintendent of Student and Family Services.
Good evening, Doug Rivers, Board Member.
Good evening, May Abdullah, Board Member.
Good evening, Diane McBride, Board Member.
Good evening, Jennifer Laird, Board Member.
Bo Wright, Superintendent of Schools.
George DeMarteau, Attorney for the District.
Hi, Emery Straczynski, Board Member.
Hello, Rachel Sherman, Board Member.
Scott Adair, Board Member.
Welcome, everyone. Pat McHugh, Assistant Superintendent for Human Resources.
Good evening, Dina Wilson, Assistant Superintendent for Instruction.
That brings us to agenda item number 3, oath of office of elected and re-elected board members. Our school attorney, Mr. George DeMarteau, will administer the oath of office to Scott Adair and Diane McBride. Rachel Sherman was sworn in on Thursday, July 1st in the district clerk's office.
I, Scott Adair, do solemnly swear that I will support the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of New York, and that I will faithfully discharge the duties of member of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District according to the best of my ability. Sign this, yes.
It's a journey.
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, Diane McBride,
I, Diane McBride,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of member of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District
of member of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
That brings us to agenda item number 4, election of the Board of Education President. The process for that is as follows. I will ask, are there any nominations for Board President? And any responses should begin with, yes, I'd like to nominate. Once the nominations are closed, each candidate in the order nominated can make a brief statement on their candidacy. Are there any nominations for Board President?
Yes, I'd like to nominate Diane McBride.
Are there any other nominations for Board President?
Yes, I'd like to nominate myself, please, Rachel Sherman.
Okay. Are there any other nominees? Okay. Mrs. McBride, would you like to make a brief statement?
Just briefly, I would be honored to have the opportunity to serve as board president again, continue the leadership in what we have going so far to move forward, do what's best for our students, to build some effective team together, and just have a fantastic year together as we look forward to getting our students back to school and moving on with some of our projects.
Mrs. Sherman?
Yes, thank you. First, I'd like to thank my husband and 3 RH students, my children, Noah, Susie, and Ellie, who are here tonight, and I'd like to thank the many people who volunteered for and supported this campaign to work and bring many new voters to the polls, including our new American neighbors, parents, and other community members who've never voted in the school board race before. Colleagues here on the Board of Education, I ask for your vote for president for the following reasons. First, as a professional who's been serving on boards and reporting to boards for much of the last decade, I know that effective governance is the foundation of a highly effective board and would be devoted to ensuring strong communication across all board members and with our administration, educators, staff, students, parents, and community. Second, as a lawyer with strong organizational and research skills who's been a member of the bar for almost 20 years, I have a deep respect for the law and ethical conduct. As president, I would work to ensure this board follows and respects the law and only prosecutes and defends lawsuits so that, necessary lawsuits, so that we do not lose focus on the important work ahead. Third, as a mother of 3 students in the district and as a person who ran an inclusive campaign that involved meeting with and listening to families and children who have disabilities, new Americans, immigrant families, limited English proficient families, students, LGBTQ youth, and homeowners and business owners, I have a recent and up-close and personal view about how people are feeling about the school district and how district policies and budget decisions affect them. Many do not feel heard or that their voice matters. I would not only tell them that their voice matters, but I would hope to show them that their voice matters through action. Fourth, I ran a campaign for school board on 4 principles that I talked about over and over again: equity, transparency, accountability, and communication. These principles resonated strongly with voters who overwhelmingly supported this campaign, casting 55% more votes for me than any other candidate. This is not to boast in any accomplishment of mine. This reflects the people taking back their power and their voice. My desire for this leadership position is only to be responsive to the voters and the community who I believe provided a mandate for these principles, that it be carried strongly into the board's activities. With these views and experiences into the leadership of the board, I would do the following things. 1, work to change the policy on the public forum to allow for more opportunities to hear and directly respond to parents and community concerns. 2, consider reorganizing the board schedule for maximum efficiency, such as alternating between special meetings and business meetings to maximize learning and preparation, going into executive session only when absolutely needed, and asking our superintendent to disseminate meeting materials a week in advance of the meeting. Our workshops would involve more of our educators and other professionals, as well as our students, as appropriate, who are closest to the learning environment. 3, I would work to improve the budgeting process to follow our board policies that call for more robust stakeholder input, teachers, paras, bus drivers, students, into the programs and services our students need than what I saw happen in the budget development process this year. 4th, the community needs to know what progress we are making. I would ask the district to regularly report directly to the community and to our staff in our priority areas of special education, equity and inclusion, instruction, and mental wellness. This will build trust and confidence that an RH education is a great investment in the future of our students and our community. And 5th, a focus on board development, including training and skills, and that new member onboarding happens earlier in the process to acclimate new members to their responsibilities and provide them needed information so that they can engage and participate from day 1 of their service. Also, in assigning members to committees, I would seek input from individual board members regarding their interests and strengths. Finally, I would work on relationship building that respects differences in style and approach among the unique members of the board. A final word. This all matters so much. I wouldn't be volunteering my time to the board if it didn't. Colleagues, you might have all considered even quitting during COVID because I know what a challenging year it was to you all, but you didn't because you think that this is all so important. To my colleague, Mr. Rivers, you wouldn't have fought so hard to reclaim your board seat if you didn't think that this was so important. So many of our educators and district employees wouldn't be giving 110% every day in their work if this wasn't all so important. Despite often great intentions and efforts, we have big systemic problems to solve, including getting back successfully to regular full-time school, addressing achievement gaps and the ways the pandemic worsened those, supporting our social, emotional, and mental well-being of our students, acknowledging and fixing the crisis in our delivery of special education services, and allocating the once-in-a-lifetime $12 million of federal stimulus, which could be transformative for students on all of these fronts. Time is ticking for our students, and we need to take wise and decisive action. Acknowledging these big problems to solve does not in any way suggest that our educators or staff did not give it their all. Much to the contrary, based on what I could see through the eyes of my 4th, 6th, and 8th graders, and as a parent, I believe our district employees gave everything they had. I want to help establish a culture where it's regarded as a strength to acknowledge our failings so that we can get better for the sake of all students. Becoming a learning organization, one that takes a good, hard look at things and continually improves. Yes, I want to celebrate the good things, and there's so much good to be proud of. And yes, let's also be straight up about the challenges without whitewashing them. This is what we need to do to be an excellent school district, and this tone needs to be set at the top, at the board level. This is the tone and approach I would bring to the board if you were to vote for me as president so that we could get great things done for our students and our community. Thank you for your consideration.
With multiple nominations, I'll now take a roll call vote. Mrs. Abdullah, of the 2 nominees, who do you vote for?
Diane McBride.
Mr. Adair, of the 2 nominees, who do you vote for?
Diane McBride.
Mrs. Laird, of the 2 nominees, who do you vote for?
Diane McBride.
Mrs. McBride, of the 2 nominees?
Diane McBride.
Okay. Mr. Rivers, of the 2 nominees, who do you vote for?
Rachel Sherman.
Rachel, of the 2 nominees?
Yes, myself, Rachel, thanks.
And Mrs. Straczynski?
I'm down here.
Down
Diane
there?
McBride.
Diane McBride, okay. Mrs. McBride, you are elected to the position of board president by a vote of 6 to 1. Congratulations, Mrs. McBride. Please take your position at the board table.
You can pass it to me.
Me, I, Diane McBride,
I, Diane McBride,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and I will faithfully discharge the duties
of President of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District
of President of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability. Brings us to the next item on the agenda. It's the election.
Madam President, may I interrupt for 1 second?
Yes.
Just for clarification on the record, I think the vote was announced as 6 to 1, and I think it was 5 to 2, just for...
I think you're right, it is
Yep.
5 to 2.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I just want to make sure that was correct.
Next up is the election of the Vice President of the Board of Education. And I will entertain any nominations for that position.
I would like to nominate Scott Adair.
Are there any other nominations for Vice President? Okay. All right. So I will take we don't need to do a roll call, so I will, unless you would prefer a roll call. All right, so then I will start with alphabetical order, so I'm trying to do this alphabetically. I don't see a hand. Why is everybody pointing?
May would be.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see a hand or anything.
It's okay. I'll vote for Scott Adair.
Okay. All right,
Who else?
Scott?
And I will vote for myself.
Okay. Brings us to Jennifer.
I'd vote for Scott.
Okay. Doug?
Scott?
Okay. Rachel?
I vote for Scott.
And me. Okay. That's unanimous. Then there's Scott Adair will be our new vice president. Congratulations.
I, Scott Adair,
I, Scott Adair,
do solemnly swear
do solemnly swear
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
that I will support the Constitution of the United States
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and the Constitution of the State of New York,
and that I will faithfully discharge the duties
and will faithfully discharge the duties
of Vice President of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District,
of Vice President of the Board of Education of the Rush-Henrietta Central School District,
according to the best of my ability.
according to the best of my ability.
Thank you for letting us get situated up here. The next item is item 6, the adoption of the agenda. I'll take a motion to reaffirm policy 2210. Mrs. Laird, a second. Mr. Rivers, all in favor?
Excuse me, some discussion, please. I move to amend the main motion to move to adopt an agenda item between 7 and 8 that would be an RFP process for certain school district advisors and, sorry, I can't read my own writing, school district advisors and, well, we can end it at school district advisors.
The request that I had was for item 8A to take it at that time, the RFP discussion during then.
Oh,
I
maybe
misunderstand?
you have another motion, but this is a motion to amend the annual policy to
Okay.
include a standing item
I understand
for
what you're saying now.
RFPs, yes, so.
That motion has been made to amend the motion. Any second that? Mr. Rivers? So we're going to vote on the amendment, so all in favor?
Well, I'm sorry, before you call the vote, may I explain why I'm asking for this? Some discussion, and certainly I'm interested in what other people may have to say about it. This is the time when the board adopts very substantial contracts, and the opportunity to have some discussion about which of those professional advisors should actually be subject to an RFP process would be a best practice. And this, architects and attorneys, et cetera, the whole panoply. And I'd be interested, of course, in the district's recommendation about what they would send out for RFP and also the board's impressions about that. So to have it as a standing item on the annual agenda would be one that just ensured that each year that comes up for discussion.
Any other thoughts on that? Go ahead.
I do, Madam President, if you don't mind. And I guess a question to the maker of the motion to amend, Rachel. Regarding that, are you looking at annually we would be RFPing these services, or would it be annually we'd just be considering the RFP for these services?
Yes, the latter, just an opportunity to consider. I certainly think it would be impractical to ask that we RFP everything, and certainly for contracts that provide good value, good service, competitive rates. I would be pleased to go on with those should the administration recommend that, just to have the conversation.
So I guess where my concern is that I'm not clear based on that answer as to how we would differentiate or who would differentiate what we're actually going to be RFPing each and every time we go through the conversation. That's what I'm trying to get my head wrapped around. I don't disagree with the concept of RFPing certain services, not at all. I believe in that fully because I do believe there is a competitive process that needs to be gone through. However, my struggle is that I don't necessarily know that we as a board or the administration needs to RFP every one of these each year based on the interest of the board at that point in time. I think we have a responsibility to educate ourselves on the services that the professionals are providing and that the administration recommends, to understand what it is that they're doing, and hopefully, if there are times where we decide that we need to RFP it, that would be met with, lack of better terms, open arms by the administration to do that versus setting that up in a policy. This is a perfect time to talk about that stuff because this is the only time we get access to some of these things. After we set them tonight, they live for the next 12 months. So I guess from that standpoint, I'm wondering why we need to set this in a policy versus having it as part of the annual discussion.
Yes, and I'm sorry if I misspoke when you asked me that clarifying question. I do intend to propose a motion that only lists it as an agenda item for discussion, not as a requirement that every contractual relationship go out for RFP.
Okay, thank you very much for that clarification. That does help.
I'm wondering if we wouldn't be better served with that process a couple months prior to this meeting so that the information is already at hand. Doing an RFP takes time to gather the information, bring folks in if you want to interview the organization, et cetera. So why would we wait to this meeting when we want to do it prior, say 3 months prior, and already have it a standing agenda item 3 months prior?
I think that raises an excellent point. As you're more familiar with the board processes than I am, what would be your thought about how we would ensure that that would come up, say, in March or April or in that time frame?
It would be an agenda topic item that we, at the end of this meeting, we have recap. It's noted that it's a follow-up item, and then it's follow-up for, say it's March, and then it gets put on agenda for discussion and processing, how we're going to go out, what ones we need RFPs, what ones we don't, et cetera. That would be my thoughts.
If I'd like, of course, to give the opportunity for anyone else with thoughts to weigh in, and I would be happy to withdraw my motion if there is a consensus on the board for the process that you've just described.
Any other comments, thoughts down at the other end of the table?
Do we need to have it in a policy written that it would be done at a certain time, or would it just be an understanding?
I'm going to defer.
Just so it's repetitive, I guess is what I'm getting at.
I get it. I'm going to defer for an answer.
Well, if you want it to be repetitive, you probably should build it into a policy that calls for it to be considered at some specific point, 3 months, as suggested prior to the reorganization meeting. Anyone can ask that an item be placed on the agenda. If there's a specific time frame one would have in mind, one could make a motion and see if the board as a whole wishes to specifically schedule it for a date in March or April, or whenever might be appropriate. But if you want it to be truly repetitive, it would have to be a policy item. And the exact policy, I would have to take a look through the policies to see. It wouldn't be part of this agenda that you're talking about now, because obviously this happens after the fact.
Thank you.
It might actually be its own policy under board goals.
So I guess the question now is do we want it to be a standing and put it into a policy, or is it not what you want to do? I need some direction from folks.
So, Madam President, it seems to me, and I'll defer to Andy if he would like to chime in at this point, but this might be something that we consider as part of budget development. I mean, since each of these contracts has a budget impact that we would have to be budgeting for in that subsequent year, that maybe as part of the budget development process, we could anticipate or add an item to that list that says consideration of RFPing certain professional services as the board deems necessary. This way, as we go through that process, which is going to take some time, as everybody's highlighted here, it would also probably coincide with the ability to build the dollars into the budget that would be necessary to provide those specific services. And I don't know if the board, I don't know if there's a district policy on budget development or if it's more of a practice procedure. Rachel's shaking her head yes, so she's...
Oh, yeah, there are big-time policies on budget development. I mean, there's a calendar tonight, for example, that's being proposed.
There are also policies and regulations regarding RFPs and bidding and the processes around those.
So maybe the place to add a policy under RFP that we will do such and such for all these positions, or I'm looking for other board members to chime in with some thoughts. We have two motions on the table, one amending the first one. An individual willing to withdraw if we want to make it a part of the policy or a process. All right. Go ahead.
My own suggestion would be that you're really looking at a different policy than the one that's under discussion right now. And if the board consensus were to withdraw or have you withdraw the motion and the second agrees, that would be appropriate. And then as a follow-up item at a future meeting sometime in the next month or two, could be scheduled to discuss how it might be incorporated into the policy so that as a specified date or meeting time arrives each year, board members could put forth suggestions as to the requirement for RFPs for positions identified by reference to this agenda item.
Madam President, I'd be happy to withdraw my motion on the basis of what George just described, if there's agreement about that.
Are we in agreement? Mayor, are we in agreement, Jennifer?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Does the second concur in the request to withdraw?
Second.
Okay. So, and you're in agreement? All right, so the amendment to the motion has been withdrawn. We will put it under board recap to return to a meeting in the next month or two to have a conversation about this process and where we need to place it in policy. All right. Now, going back to this the original motion that was the reaffirmation of the policy. I had a motion, I had a second. All right, motion was made by Jennifer, that was seconded by Mr. Rivers there. Any other discussion? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. This brings us to item 8. Mr. Rivers, would you like me to pull aside 8A? Or can we just take a motion on it and then have the conversation?
Yeah.
Or do you want to follow with the discussion we just had?
Yeah, just follow a process, and we can just have a discussion about the RFP.
Okay, so you want to have that conversation?
Yes.
All right, so then I need a motion for item 8, the appointment and designation of salaries and fees for school district positions, advisors, and firms. I'll take a motion. Mrs. Straczynski?
Did you? The last vote was on the agenda item reaffirmation?
Oh, I'm so sorry, I skipped number 7. My apologies. I'm writing lots of notes, and I kind of went right over my note. All right, let's step back to number 7, appointment and designation of salaries and fees for district officers. It's item 7A through M. I will take a motion for that.
So moved.
Mrs. Sherman, Mrs.
Second.
Mr. Adair. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Now we will move to number 8. I'll take a motion for the appointment and designation of salaries and fees for school district positions, advisors, and firms. Mr. Straczynski, a second. Ms. Abdullah. There was a request to discuss item 8A. Mr. Rivers?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to put out there that should we have an RFP out for our attorney position, just so that we can make sure that it's most current and update and provide an opportunity for other candidates to put their name in the hat. We've been trying to diversify pretty much RH in a lot of different ways, and this could be an opportunity to do that. But most importantly is as we've talked in the past, I haven't seen an updated RFP for that. So even from an optics standpoint, it might be in our best interest to do that, so that even if our current attorney provides the best opportunity for RH in the partnership, then at least it's visible.
Madam President, point of order. Is that a motion that Mr. Rivers has made that is amending the main motion, or is this discussion on the main motion?
It's discussion on that topic. He asked if we could talk about on RFP. He has not made a motion on it yet. So I afforded him the opportunity, as we would any of those items, for discussion.
Well, I do think it is a very good practice to do that from time to time, and the reasons Mr. Rivers has raised seem like important reasons to me, so I would be in favor of putting out an RFP, and if current school attorney is the most experienced and best bidder out there, then, you know, that would be great, and if there are others that we don't know of yet, but we learn, that would be good for the board to know as well.
Thoughts from other board members?
Madam President, I guess I would ask to Rachel on that as a follow-up. What would be, if we are going to, and it's probably not to Rachel, so I apologize, it may be to you, what would we do in the meantime between the process of RFPing that service and tonight? Because effectively, we're renewing that contract to, I'll call it, start July 1 for this school year. For this school year, we would be, I guess we wouldn't be uncovered, but we would be committed to that contract, I think, for the entire year based on approval tonight, if we were to approve it as part of this resolution. So to just say that we were going to go to RFP at this point in time, we may have a gap in coverage, I guess, is what I'm thinking.
I would agree with you, and I'm not opposed to RFPing. What I would say is, we just had a whole conversation about other items that we would want to RFP. Could we not just put that with that previous discussion, and then in March, consider doing an RFP at that time, or looking at all the positions we want to RFP and do it at the same time? That would be my thought, because yes, we would definitely be without that representation that would be very important for us at this time. Any other board members?
May I propose a potential solution to the very good point about not wanting to be without coverage, which would be to explore or approve in a month-to-month extension on the same terms as proposed, so that our current school attorney would not be out whatever increase or proposal that his firm has made, but that we would be able to continue coverage of those needs until such time that an RFP were able to be processed. pursued, sorry, is a better word.
I guess I have a question as to why just we selected the attorney. According to this, there's the attorney, medical service, district legal advisors. I mean, I could go on. There's all listed up until Q. Why are we just picking out the school attorneys? If we're going to RFP the one, then why aren't we asking for anything else?
We can do all of them. We can choose one, but in our executive session, we had a conversation about why I was making that recommendation. So if you want to have that discussion here in an open session, you vote on it so we can chair that, then I would be glad to have that again. I'm not trying to pick on any one individual. I am not trying to go after George. The RFPs are important. They should be reviewed. The RFPs, in this case, in our attorney case, the RFP hasn't been done in how many years? So I think it's important that we visit it. I think that it's not, to make it clear for you, Jennifer, it's not Doug Rivers, because George was a lawyer being removed from the board. I'm attacking him. That is not what this is about.
I didn't ask, I didn't say that. I just said that there are.
I'm making it clear. You asked. I'm just making it clear.
okay.
I'm not attacking George DiMarteau because what had happened. All I'm saying from good practice is that all of our RFPs, and in this case, that's the one that I chose in executive session, because that was our conversation. It was about George, his excuse me, his upcoming contract. It was the timing of it. I'm just sharing, because you asked. So I want to make sure you understand, I am not trying to attack George. I'm really looking at this from an RFP standpoint and saying, hey, if our current standing lawyers doing a great job, put our RFP out there and make sure that we're continuing asking for an RFP. And it might be on a 5-year cycle, whatever that cycle is, as long as it's happening. So please don't, I'm just saying, please don't think of it as an attack. It's just a process that I'm trying to make sure that we're following.
So,
Madam President, with the longest tenure on the board, would you be able to tell us when was the last time we had an RFP for our school district attorney?
I would have to say that we haven't had one in a really long time. He has been with us for 38 years. He's only the second school attorney that we have had. I'd have to say that he has great institutional memory for us and all the different activities that have gone on for us in the district. What I would really like to say is that if we're putting other items into a process for RFP, I would say that we should take all of these that are on here, put it into the process, move forward for this evening, approving the contract, and then getting it onto an RFP cycle. I think that would be the appropriate, fair thing to do for the evening, so that we're not tying up a contract.
So if I could, from a practical sense, because in my day job, I'm part of a lot of RFPs, and Pat, since you brought it up, do RFPs for this type of service fall under you, or do they fall under Andy, or is that?
It depends. For the school attorney, it falls under Andy. For the other legal services, it falls under me.
So just as a point of reference, also included in this resolution is the external auditors, who are also out to bid at this point in time. Is that?
they will be this fall, right? This is their last year of 5 years.
Yeah, so they're doing this year's audit, and then next year, we will go through a process.
Correct.
Andy, just from your standpoint, how long does an RFP process take for the district to put it out on the streets, get the responses back, evaluate those, and put it under consideration? Because I know there's a length of time there.
Right, to do it appropriately is definitely an involved process, because you want to get in and interview the people. It's not just a matter of cost, it's a matter of service, and that is what makes it different than typical bidding. And it is an involved process, so I would say 3 months at a minimum if we were to do it justice. And if we were to do multiple services, it would be a huge burden. So I would hope that we would be judicious in what we would pick and how often we pick it.
Yeah, and so that gets me to where I'm at in the concept of maybe the answer is, based on the earlier conversation, that we're going to have this RFP process for, I'll call it professional services, for lack of a better conversation piece, built into next year's budget process in my mind, which would start up probably in the October, November timeframe, I'm assuming, Andy. I don't remember the exact dates that it starts, but that sounds familiar to me.
Internally, right, it's October.
It doesn't sound like from a board perspective, we're going to have to go through the list of these professional services to determine who we'd like to RFP. Maybe the right answer for both the district standpoint and the administrative standpoint and from the board standpoint is to approve this contract for these next 12 months while we identify this and other services that are already anticipated to go out to bid, and maybe some others that we want to take a look at, so that for next year's budget process, which I think is what you were getting to, Madam President, is the fact that we would then have a bunch of RFPs to choose from that perspective. I don't know if that accomplishes what people were looking to accomplish, but it seems like that may be the only reasonable answer from a time frame perspective to be able to get all this stuff done.
And maybe a part of that thinking is, maybe an annual update on the contract for, let's use just the attorney position. It could be any others. Shouldn't be annual. Maybe it's triannual or something that's manageable. Because again, I think from an optics standpoint, just approving somebody could look not good, I should say. So maybe that should be a part of the conversation, is what's that fair timeline? And not just the attorney, though. So if we hit the RFP, really have a good conversation about it, and making sure that anyone who's involved with that is at the table so that they know the workload behind it.
Yeah, I do think that would be a good process and might kind of move us forward in making sure that we're consistently addressing this on a yearly basis. I understand what you're saying, Doug, that I want to put some of them out there. I don't want to be looking at all of them every year, but there may come a reason why we want to go look at one a little bit closer one year that's not necessarily in that cycle. It always gives us, the board, the prerogative to do that, I guess, is where my head is at.
That seems to me to be reasonable.
Others? Are we ready to call the vote? All right. So the motion is to make these appointments. We've had the conversation of putting them into the process that we discussed previously. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. This brings us to item 9, the resolution of bonding personnel. I'll take a motion to approve.
So moved, Madam President.
Mr. Dare,
Second.
Mrs. Sherman. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. This brings us to item 10, resolution designating depositories for our monies. That's 10A through I. I'll take a motion.
I'll move it, Madam President.
A second.
Second.
Mr. Rivers, any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Number 11, resolution designating depositories for school funds. I'll take a motion. Mrs. Jasinski? Mrs. Abdullah? Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. Brings us to 12, the resolution establishing petty cash funds. I'll take a motion.
I'll move it, Madam President. It's my favorite topic.
And I saw Mrs. Laird's hand. I'll take that as a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Authorizations for other financial matters. I think this is the one that had some questions on. I'll take a motion to approve, and then we'll get questions. Mrs. Abdullah? A second. Mrs. Laird? Okay. Mr. Scott, did you have questions?
I did have some questions regarding this information, and the superintendent was responsive in his email this afternoon regarding that, and certainly my question was regarding really primarily the $2,500 in item H, as to whether or not that was an appropriate dollar amount and whether or not that was something that had been adjusted previously. He responded with the fact that these primarily fall under the STAR exemption piece of real property tax law, and thus it is an appropriate dollar amount, and I appreciate the answer from the question, so thank you.
All right. Any other questions? All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. Item 14, designation of the district designations, designating certain administrators to act in different positions throughout the district. I'll take a motion to approve. Mr. Rivers, second. Mrs. Laird, any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. All right, this brings us to item 15, miscellaneous items, different membership organizations, newspapers for legal advertising, and so on, A through M. Oops, excuse me, A through Q. We'll take a motion to accept. Mrs. Abdullah, second. Mrs. Laird.
Point of order, Madam President, I would like to have discussion on number C, letter C, sorry. So I don't know if you'd like to get through this motion taking out C, or whether you'd like me to amend this motion to put on the table the topic for discussion.
Let's just have a conversation, and if we need to amend it, I'll ask it to. Okay.
Sure.
So 14C you're discussing?
Yes, so that's the resolution designating the date, time, and location of the regular meetings of the board. It includes every other, I'm sorry, not every other week.
I'm sorry, I was looking at the wrong numbers, like, where are you?
Oh, okay.
15C, thank you.
So for as long as I've been coming to the district, the district board meetings, there have been two, generally speaking, 2 per month, and one in July and one in August. And the motion that I'm contemplating making is to propose that there be a series of special meetings that would be on the alternating Tuesdays from now until our September meeting, because we only have one other meeting in August, regular board meeting, and yet the task to return students to school lay before us still. And the plan, I know we'll hear from Mr. Wright during the regular meeting about it. There is not yet an approved plan for the school district. So as a board member thinking about our students, but as a parent as well, thinking about my students, the importance of 5-day-a-week school cannot be understated. And with all the twists and turns that arose last summer, all the changing regulations and the busing issues and the communications that had to go out, I really think that the public and the parents of this district would be well served if we were able to be on top of this on a weekly basis until all students are back to school 5 days a week. So that's the motion I'm contemplating making, and I'm interested certainly in other board members' opinions about that.
Other board members?
I'm away several weeks throughout this summer. I'm not going to be home very much this summer.
And I recognize people would love to travel. I would too. I have a vacation. I think with the beauty of electronic meeting attendance, either you can choose to attend electronically. I know 100% participation is excellent and ideal, but I also recognize you have a quorum with 4 board members, and if there's 1 or 2 who miss occasionally, that's not, I think that's to be expected.
I do see the importance of the plan to bring our the students back in September full-time, 5 days a week. That's a dream of mine, been a year and a half. But for this plan to actually put together, it's not just the board, the staff. I would really not consider taking that time away, because work full-time until 5, and then they grace us with their presence at our meetings. If we actually considering the plan, we would rather give them the time to actually work on that plan and keep us updated. The line of communication is open all the time. Since you became a board member, you've seen the emails back and forth every half an hour. So if there's something that we need to act on, I would think we will be available to act on. So I do really think about others. If I'm available, it's a privilege for me to be sitting here. Well, I have someone keeping an eye on the troops back home, but I don't think that's a luxury for everyone. So I would really be careful when I'm asking too much of time of other people. So.
Yeah, I think your point is really well taken, and I want to respect the time of our hardworking administration, certainly. And potentially that's addressed by, the meeting could be in a workday at 3 o'clock. It could be half an hour long. It's only this topic, so that it's not the extensive set of materials and preparation that go into these regular meetings. So I think at least part of your concerns might be addressed by something like that.
I see your point, but actually I work full-time, so 9 to 5. I'm available to write emails back and forth, but I appreciate my employer being flexible, ending my time on 5 o'clock, but it would be an extent for me to actually ask for the time during the workday that I'm paid for to attend to other businesses. I'm not sure if others would see that's something, a possibility that they could be able to do during the time, but I just reiterating that if there is anything that we need to act on, we will be here. We have been able to attend to any board business during the day or in the evenings before.
I think that, I know that things change fluidly, and I understand that, but I also think that Mr. Wright and his cabinet have the capacity to do this and to come up with the plans. And like May and I think Anne Marie said, I mean, if they need to, they can call on us, and we can give them some input. Everyone's goal is to get everyone back 5 days a week. I don't think we need to micromanage and ask them what they've done this week to get us to back to school 5 days. I think they are working diligently getting everyone back and accommodating schedules and looking at things. And I think Mr. Wright will hopefully address it in his oral report, and then we can go from there. I don't think it's necessary to have additional meetings over the summer, especially with schedules being as they are. And let me tell you, as a teacher, when I go away to Florida, I am not taking my computer or phone, and I am not available at all. So, I mean, I think people need to respect our time as well.
And I just want to say, it's not only our time, but it's the people who set up and tear down. It's Karen who has additional work. It's the people who record the meetings. There's a lot more people than those of us sitting on the stage that work really hard to make these happen. So we have that. And the other thing is we do have special meetings sometimes. So when something comes up of Bo's like, I need to get the board together, we'll get a group date set together and we meet sometimes. I don't think there's been, since I've been on the board, there's not been a summer where we haven't had additional meeting or a few in some cases. So we're always able to have additional meetings. We're not probably scheduling them regularly, but when that comes up, we absolutely have, I guarantee you, we're likely to have one this summer. I'm trying not, so don't do it, Bo, if you can help it. I just have another one, but it's likely that we probably will with school starting, hopefully.
Bo, do you anticipate some feedback sooner than later on that to help us think about this a little differently, or?
So that's what I'm going to be talking about
Okay.
once we
got
get
it.
into the regular meeting and I give my update.
I would recommend that we keep the schedule as posted. After the superintendent's report, we'll know if we need to have additional meetings. I would suggest we keep it to a special meeting, not set up a weekly meeting. Part of that is, too, there may not be anything that needs to be reported. We come for a meeting, and then there's nothing for us to act upon or hear about or anything. And I would hate to waste everyone's time on that perspective. Like everyone has said, we need a meeting, we call one. We just need to provide 24-hour notice that it's going to take place, and we can have a meeting if needed. Anybody else have comments?
Just add it's a bit repetitive, but I think everybody sitting up here wants everyone back in the buildings 5 days a week without a doubt come September. I do think that some of the delays of getting information for us to effectively be able to communicate a plan to the public is out of our control from a board's perspective and even from the administration's perspective. So I look forward to, as much as I'd like to steal Bo's thunder and pull it into this meeting, I'll wait for that, and I think that this board will be ready and willing and able to have any special meetings when it comes to talking about 5-day-a-week September classes.
Madam President, so based on this conversation, I won't be making a motion to amend. I did have a question about the February 22nd meeting, which is during February break, and my family does always go away February break, and I don't mind participating remotely if you know if that will be an option then.
It absolutely can be an option for you to attend remotely. Is there anyone else that would be a conflict for them, February 22nd?
It may be for me as well.
Okay.
Me too.
All right, so let's say that we approve the calendar minus the February 22nd. We can make this a motion, and then find another date, or is that impossible to find another date for us?
I don't think it's impossible to find another date. I think we could do 2 meetings back-to-back. One, I believe it would be February 8th, and the other February 15th, which would allow us to get 2 meetings in prior to February break.
And not interrupt, I know that's a pretty busy budget season, not interrupt the cadence of that.
We may have to rearrange some things, but I don't think that it would be disruptive. I think that we would be able to fit that meeting in and still meet other requirements related to budget and other matters.
So would that be agreeable to folks, February 8th and 15th instead of February 8th and 22nd? Everybody?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Any other comments, questions regarding section 15? All right, so I will call the vote with the adjustment made to the calendar. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? Any abstentions? All right. Brings us to 16, board appointments. I'll take a motion to approve.
Oh, I'm sorry, Madam President, point of order, did you, did we just finished 15? I'm sorry, go ahead.
Correct. Yes, thank you. 16, board appointments. Mr. Rivers. Second. Ms. Abdullah. Any discussion? All right, seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries. This brings us to the close of the reorganizational meeting. We'll take a two-minute
Motion to adjourn.
2-minute break after we have any motion to adjourn, just to kind of, so I can readjust some things up here. Motion by Mr. Adair.
Second.
And Mrs. Sherman, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. All right, just take a moment or two here to adjust, and then we'll come back into our regular meeting. All right, looks like everybody is back, and I don't have the gavel, so I'm just going to do this. We'll call our meeting to order. We've already had introductions in the pledge, so we do not need to do that again. Agenda review. I do not have any items that need to change the agenda. I know there'll be some places for conversation, discussion. Any other announcements? All right. This brings us to the public forum portion of our meeting. At this time, I have one card that has been provided to me. And if audience members can come up to the microphone here in the middle, state your name and address for us, and then we'll give you 3 minutes to have a conversation. My first card, he's already on his way up, Brian Usselman. Thank you, Brian.
Hi, I'm Brian Usselman, 985 Rabbit Ear Pass, Victor, New York, 14564. Once again, my name is Brian Usselman, and I play 3 honorable roles here at Rush-Henrietta. I'm a math teacher, about a 20-second walk down the hallway. I'm also the varsity bowling coach. We've got a lot of titles to defend. And as of July 1st, I'm the RHEA president of the Teachers Chapter. Let me formally introduce myself to all of you once again. I've spoken to a few of you, but not all of you. And one of my goals as president is to foster communication between the teachers and the Board of Education. How do we do that? We can do that by engaging in more frequent and routine conversations. My contact information is on the card that I filled out tonight. Hope we can continue to increase our communication with a focus on making the student experience at Rush-Henrietta the best it can be. Thank you for your time tonight, and I look forward to meeting with all of you soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. We look forward to working with you. Is there anyone else in the audience that would like to speak at this time during public forum? On items that are not on the agenda, I apologize. So if it's an item that's on the agenda, we'll ask you to wait to that time, but if it's not, come on up to the microphone.
Good evening. My name is Carolyn Lewis. I live at 105 Thunder Ridge Drive, Rush, New York. I'm standing again on representing the swim parents. At this time, we are heading into the fall, and a coach has not been selected. I'm just standing again because to be sure that the board and administration is still aware of this issue that has not been resolved, and we're coming up to a year since this began. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Are there any other speakers this evening? Seeing none, this brings us to consent agenda items. Action 4A through D. I'll take a motion to approve. Mrs. Straczynski. A second. Mr. Rivers. All right, any discussion?
Sorry, I just wonder if someone could help me understand. I did have a helpful conversation with Anne Marie, but I'd also appreciate other people's thoughts on the Committee on Special Education determinations, the classifications. Some are either the appointments, some are declassified, some are denied services. Who reviews these eligibility determinations? And I would just like to know the nature of that review, because clearly there's no information coming to this board about the particulars, at least as of this point. There's no information coming to the board as of the particulars of those special education placements. And I certainly don't want to be a rubber stamp if I have a responsibility to approve these recommendations. I would feel more comfort knowing that there has been some independent eyes on it, and what the nature of the review of these committee determinations is.
Nolan, do you want to speak to that?
Sure. As part of Part 200 of the regulations, so any of the school-recommended programs that you see outlined here, there is a process called the Committee on Special Education for each student identified. And so when there is a Committee on Special Ed, there's a regular ed teacher that's represented, special ed teacher, psychologist, other related services, again, depending on each student, because each services are a little bit different. Some students receive speech, so if they do receive speech, there's a speech teacher at the table. There's reevaluations that takes place. And let me say this, that the parent of the students or the guardians are a part of that committee. So together, the committee will make a decision based on evaluation, the annual reviews, the progress or lack of progress that that student are making, and the committee is the one that moves forward in terms of making those decisions. And part of the board process is that once those decisions are made through the Committee on Special Ed, it has to come through the board for the board to finally approve it.
So there's no one who reviews the committee's ineligibility or declassification determinations?
Well, the declassification is part of, we have a process per Part 200 of the regulations. And when a student comes up for D-class or no longer needing services, is based on an update of where they are in terms of whether they've met all of the goals in their IEPs.
If I might, special education is a peculiar area. There are a number of circumstances in special education where the board, while technically approving information or action, really has no involvement in the determination of what that action is going to be. And the system relies in large part on the fact that if there's a dispute or one party is aggrieved, there are appeals processes built in to the determination process and to the placement process and to the services, and everything about it is built into a process where there's an appeal for parents, there's an appeal for the district from issues that may come up based on Committee on Special Education decisions. It is technically true, no, it's not technically true, it's actually true that the board approves these actions, but the reality is that the board has very little input into what those actions are going to be, because the system requires that the recommendations and placements, everything that goes along with it, come from the Committee on Special Education, as Nerland explained. Another example of the peculiarity of the special education circumstance is when there are hearings. This board and other boards will approve from time to time the appointment of a hearing officer, but that is a rubber stamp, because the hearing officer is actually chosen through a process established by the State Education Department, and the board has no say in who it's going to be, and yet the board must actually take action to approve it. So it looks as if the board's approving, the board has no say. So what you're talking about is consistent with that odd relationship between the Board of Education and the Committee on Special Education. The board is kept informed from a very high level in terms of looking at these circumstances, and can ask and press sometimes if they have particular information for follow-up, but the board has no real opportunity to weigh in and change or suggest changes to those placements.
Thank you, George, and thank you, Nerland, for that background. I'm wondering, is there a time when information comes before the board about the appeals? I mean, because obviously it would interest me, if, I'm sure parents from time to time are aggrieved in appeal, I would want to make sure that our system is strong and that we're trying to keep those to a minimum, and certainly that we're not an outlier among our peers, that we're doing worse than others, for example. Is there a time when that information does regularly come before the board, if you know?
If there is an appeal?
Number of appeals, demographics of the families involved.
Anytime we are involved in an appeal, the board is made aware of those. And if you recall, at the last board meeting, there was an appeal on the table that we had to, I think the board voted on it. That was something that they were kept abreast of. And the lawyers that were involved in that process came and offered the information, and we kept the board abreast of everything that was going on behind the scenes. But of course, like George says, there's a hearing officer appointed by the State Education Department, and we go through the process of presenting our evidence with our lawyers, and of course, the parents or guardians have their right to be represented as well, while we have a hearing officer.
The appeal isn't what you think of in terms of an attorney and an appeal to a higher court. The appeal process includes everything from attempted dispute resolution through mediation and ultimately a potential impartial hearing. So it's a multi-step, highly regulated process.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. I'm satisfied for this evening that I have enough information to be able to vote on the motion. So thank you for indulging me that.
If I could
additional
add to that real
information.
quick, if you don't mind. Is there anything Noreen, is there anything we can get as a board to kind of look at some of the metrics of the results of this? For example, students with disabilities who've been suspended, or, just things that help us know that we can have some action items to help you to increase, say, graduation numbers or reduce kids dropping out. Is there anything that you can give us on a regular basis to help navigate through that, or?
And I think it's not something that we can make a decision on right now.
Right.
If there are specific things that you want to think about that you would need, anytime the board is in need of any information in terms of workshop or specific things about specific department, we are always willing to provide. So for example, when you talk about suspension, we don't only look at suspension for students with disabilities, we also look at suspension of all students. And the state has a process as well where we have to not only record suspension overall for the entire district, but there's a piece that is different for special ed as well. As a matter of fact, I have a report that's due right now by August 8th where we have to specifically identify students with disabilities who were suspended, how many times they were suspended, why, the categories, if they're learning disabled versus autistic. So there's a lot of regulations that we have to follow, and there's a lot of report that's given to the state. And so we have these information on hand. So if at any time the board requests any specifics, rather than sit here and just kind of like think through in my head in terms of what you would like, definitely there is a process where you usually would request a workshop or any other specific information. We would be glad to do that. The good news is that we don't work alone. We have a team. I have two coordinators in the office along with other clericals that can easily get that information, and we can put it together for the board.
Thank you.
Newland, I have a question for you regarding that. And is there any annualized reporting that is done back to the state that we would be able to, I'm going to use the term of consume at some point in time regarding what has transpired in the programs?
Sure, we can definitely do that. So far this year, there was a workshop that was done for the board, specifically focusing on special ed, and so we can revisit because it is going to be a district priority. So one of the areas under the plan of work that we're continuing to work on is graduation. The other thing is list restrictive environment. So any of those pieces, if you want information on them, once we agreed what the district priorities are going to look like, and I'm thinking special ed is going to continue to be one of them, we can certainly bring a couple of workshops or updates about pieces of the plan of work and where we were and where we are right now. One of the places that we are making some movement is regarding least restrictive environment. But at the same time, graduation rates sometimes fluctuate, not because you're not dealing with apples and apples or oranges. You're not comparing oranges to oranges because every year, every cohort is different. If you have a year where the cohort of students with disabilities, there's more who are eligible for what they call the NISA, the reality is your graduation rate is going down. So if there's any understanding that needs to be said, because special ed can be very hard to understand, we will be glad to explain all of those different pieces at different times, because sometimes you have to do it in chunks to get a bigger understanding. But understand that especially with special ed, Part 200 of the regulation is what we have to follow. If we don't do a misstep with any of them, that will open us up to a lot of litigation. So
I appreciate what you've commented on here this evening and certainly have a lot more to digest regarding this. I think after probably this second sentence, I was kind of in a fog regarding the details of it. But I know that you and your department and the folks that work for you do a great job regarding this stuff. So I think this continued education, at least for this new board member, will be imperative for my knowledge and learning as I go forward. So thank you.
So one of the things that we do typically at our August meeting is we present a draft of our annual workshop schedule to the board for review and for comment. Special education, at least as long as I've been here, is always at least one workshop on the schedule. So at our next meeting, we can have more conversation about about the workshop schedule as a whole, because a lot of the items that you're mentioning and the things that you're talking about specific to special ed are topics that are covered within that workshop. And it sounds like there's an interest there. So when we draft the schedule, we can make sure that that's a topic that's covered sooner than later.
And I'm sorry, I know I'm like special meeting lady over here. Everything's a special meeting, but I think of the last regular meeting that this board had was 3 hours long, and it included a very thorough review of the equity priority, which was excellent, and I didn't want to be without that thorough review and presentation, yet it did make the regular meeting go on. I think that portion alone was more than an hour. So I guess I would ask for the consideration, especially with some of us on the newer end and without a lot of familiarity, myself personally, and no personal firsthand experience. I've heard a lot of things, but no personal experience. I, for one, would greatly benefit from a special meeting on all of the topics Nirland has sort of set forth, and I would envision it's, in maybe an hour or more with questions. So I would just ask that people keep an open mind potentially to that.
Okay. Any other conversation on number 4? Everybody's okay with the information? All right, then we'll call the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 7-0. This brings us to item 5, personnel actions. I'll take a motion to approve. Mr. Dare. Second. Ms. Abdullah. Okay.
Some discussion, please, Madam President. So on personnel actions, obviously there is confidential information behind them that I would, of course, not raise in public. And I would like the opportunity to be able to obtain more information about the content of that document. I do think it would be helpful to have information about resignations and the purpose of resignations, the stated reasons that employees give when they do resign, because we are in, I believe, a very tight market for talent, and that keeping our great people in place is pretty important. And so when I know people voluntarily leave at all times for all reasons, but I, for one, would find it helpful to know if just the reasons for those resignations.
Thoughts by anybody? That would have to be something we would have to do in an executive session to have that conversation, I would imagine, George, because it would bring up specific names and specific reasons.
Or maybe it could be a part of the report going forward. I don't know that there always needs to be discussion about it. I would like to be privy to that information at some point in reviewing the personnel actions document.
If the entire board collectively is asking us to do this, then this is something that we'll discuss and talk about how we operationalize it.
My only concern would be, I'm assuming that this is the type of report that we would be receiving, and thus it becomes a public document at that point in time. So it does seem like this is exactly what executive session would be for if we wanted to further explore some of the reasons behind that, and I'm sure that Pat and his staff could probably provide those, but I think it's probably best done in an executive session versus having a live report out there that inadvertently or...
I think either way it's protected from FOIL, for example, but I'm not looking to proliferate executive session and extend the time for discussion, especially when there's no indication of concern. So I'm not saying I am concerned, I'm saying I'd just like to know the reasons, and hopefully I will not be concerned, because, the stated reason for resignation doesn't concern me. Which is why I suppose a report probably satisfies me and doesn't require additional time for discussion.
So again, I want to reiterate what you're suggesting, if I'm hearing you correctly, is going to be a bit cumbersome. So again, if collectively this is the direction of the board, then, we'll make it happen.
And can you explain why it's cumbersome? because the
Well, if you're-
report is being created and people
But
are
if you're-
checking into it.
Not to interrupt, I apologize.
No, go ahead, I'd like to know more.
If we're going to be asked to report to the board every single time that an employee resigns, that is going to become cumbersome. And so I'm just trying to get a feel for the direction collectively of where we're headed with this conversation, along with some of the other things that are being suggested.
Or if Mr. McHugh wants, I mean, I assume as the human resources person, he's keeping good tabs on that. I'll give you an example. You can get a job at McDonald's for $15 an hour, but our para contracts, have ranges from, I forget what, $11, $12, right? If time and time again, folks are leaving, good paras are leaving and saying, hey, I'm sorry, I just can't make enough money here, I want to know that. I want to know that because I want us to be able to talk about that honestly in the budgeting process, right, with the new resources we're getting. Should we be, and I know it's negotiated, and when you open negotiations, right, you have positions, but I want to make sure that that information is something that is in front of us so that, and so I'm not looking to make work. And if Mr. McHugh's already keeping reports of things like that, then they can come periodically, and that would satisfy me. I wouldn't ask you to have to amend this personnel.
And if we were able to do it in a way that's reasonable periodically, I mean, Pat, I'll let you speak to it, because I know that you and your team do have a good handle with
of course.
the district.
One question I would have would be for legal counsel in terms of whether it's legal to provide that information as part of the personnel agenda, because the personnel agenda does become a public document after the meeting, after it's approved. And in many cases, we have separation agreements with employees where we have entered into that separation agreement under certain terms with the employees and their association representatives that prevent the district from disclosing the actual reason for them to leave. So I would want to know in general, is it permissible to publicize that information? And if so, what is the implication for those agreements?
Okay,
Certainly,
fair enough.
Certainly, some of what you just said would not be available to the public. Some of it might be, but some of it certainly would not be.
And I just think it goes back to, I guess, the superintendent's comment of what does the board think as to what we want, and us giving them direction will help eliminate a lot of this back and forth. And my thought process on it is we have two bites at the apple almost, one being executive session. If we start to see a pattern of certain types of employee groups or groupings leave because of low wages, but the other piece of it is, and this is where and Doug was at the meeting regarding the School Boards Association when they went through where the board's role was as far as union negotiations goes. And if I step into it here, George, please stop me. I don't think I will, because I think my knowledge is very limited. But we kind of set some parameters regarding that and give that direction to the administration, because I don't think the board is involved from this district's perspective in negotiations. And that's really where we could then find that information useful to be able to say, hey, we want to make sure that everybody's making over $15 an hour from that perspective, regardless of the position that they hold inside of the district. So I feel like this is something that really probably, we can all see a pattern if we read through these documents, and if there's some concerns that we should probably bring those up in executive session versus having a monthly report, because I don't think we're going to be doing this very often is my gut impression of it, but periodically we certainly may start to see something that we want some more information on, and I don't think anyone's shying away from that versus providing it on a monthly or bi-weekly basis whenever we get the information. Because I always fear, and this is no fault of anybody's, but having lived through this, where information that was foiled that contained personal information, it was not redacted on accident, but all of a sudden that information was then out there. So we can have all the best intentions of making sure that when a document appears in our folders, that it's redacted, or everything's foilable from that perspective with redactions, but I would be concerned about those accidents that could potentially happen in that circumstance.
Mr. Whitmore is our FOIL officer, so I'm sure he will defend the integrity of the process.
And Mr. Whitmore may not always be our FOIL officer, so I don't want to leave it in that hands.
And he certainly doesn't have the capacity to review all the documents that would flow through.
Mr. Rivers?
Yeah, so I know we've been pursuing a pretty aggressive recruitment process to try to get new teachers who are qualified, diverse. Do you think that we could have maybe a categorical report saying this is why they left, and then we can use that to our advantage for recruitment process, maybe once a year? Would that benefit?
Again, I would defer to the superintendent if that's something that the board collectively is asking for. That's certainly something we can consider.
Because then it wouldn't be a name basis, right? It would be just, look, here's the reasons, what can we do with this information for decision-making purposes, and then how can we adjust our recruitment process? So I don't know if that would be beneficial or not.
It's important to note, too, that since we're considering this week's agenda, that because the board meets less frequently during the summer, you're going to see a larger number of year-end staff transitions, be that resignations, retirements. They're held until this meeting and the August meeting. That's when they get processed through the separation and, contractual requirements, et cetera.
So using that as an example, say you have 20 people, 5 retire, that's beneficial, right?
Right.
Information.
Yes, and that's noted, and retirements are noted, et cetera.
Thank you.
So I think it's sort of a balance between making sure that you always have what you need to make informed decisions regardless of the issue, but also making sure that it's manageable. Like I said, depending on what you're asking for, I just want to note that it can be cumbersome.
So when I saw some heads nodding down at this end, in agreement with if we needed some more specific information, that the executive session process would be the place that you would ask that information. And I think right now that would be the appropriate, that's what I'm getting from what I'm seeing with people nodding in that agreement. I would say then that if you needed more information, that's when the email to the superintendent would be the appropriate thing, and then we would be able to answer that question in executive session. That's what I'm seeing and what I've heard.
Thank you for this discussion, for all this information. I appreciated it.
Okay. So we have the motion on the floor by Scott, second by Doug. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries 7-0. This brings us to the superintendent's report.
Okay, there were 3 items that were submitted as written reports. The first is the Interscholastic Sports Report for spring. I see that Dr. Stewart is here. I'm going to ask him to come up and just give us a very brief summary of that report, and then there'll be a brief opportunity to comment on the part of the board.
Thanks. Thank you, Bo. Our spring season was interesting, of course, this school year. And, what was really neat about athletics is that we pulled together and we pulled off 4 complete seasons. And towards the end of the spring season, a lot of the restrictions were relaxed a bit. So we were able to, towards the end of the spring season, whether it was being outdoors and not worrying about a mask, that happened for most of the season, just at the tail end of the season. But we did have a lot of success in the spring season. Our teams were competitive, I can tell you. We were in the girls lacrosse finals. We lost in the final to Pittsford on a very, very close event. Our boys track team was very successful. That's all included in the report. Girls track as well. Softball was successful. Baseball was as well. The weather was tricky in the beginning, but it always is in the spring. And towards the end of the spring season, the weather kind of loosened up on us a little bit, and we were able to get our games in. But we did get almost all of the spring games in, condensed in such a short amount of time. So it was hectic at first, and then we were able to relax a little bit, and we have a short amount of time before we start up again. for the fall.
And any questions for him?
I have a question. Thank you so much for that. I started following you all on social media. I think I've really enjoyed that. So thank you very much. And I have a modified athlete myself, so maybe we'll see. Should he make some sports teams in the future, it'll be an area of a lot of fun and interest for me. We heard a swim parent earlier today talk about the importance of hiring an excellent swim coach, and I just wonder if that's a priority to you. And am I right that the swim team, my understanding of the swim team is a very diverse, sort of demographically diverse sport, which I think is phenomenal, that reflecting our values of inclusion, and I'm wondering, is that your perspective as well?
Yes, absolutely. And it's certainly a priority. So we are, I did hear the moms are certainly concerned and the dads are concerned about our process, and we are putting closure on that very, very soon. But it is absolutely a priority. All of our sports teams are a priority in this school district and all school districts. And we will absolutely have closure on that. The swim team has been, the boys' team was successful, the girls' team was as well. And we pride ourselves in the diversity that we have on all of our programs, but certainly for the swim program as well.
Thank you for that information.
Sure.
Any other questions for Tom?
Great job.
All right, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thanks for your support.
I want to thank Dr. Stewart and all of our coaches and athletes and families. This was a very unorthodox year in sports, and it was very difficult at times. And I think in the very, very beginning of the school year, when we were approved to actually have sports seasons, I think that there were a lot of skeptics, but I think that each season and every program was very successful, well beyond our expectations, and that's attributed to the hard work of Dr. Stewart, his team, our athletes, and their families, so thank you. There were two other reports that were submitted for review and consideration, one being the corporal punishment report for the second semester and the extra activities report for the period of the spring through the end of the year. Are there any questions or comments on those reports?
No.
Okay. Then we will transition to oral information. I did just want to give the board a reminder. We have the opportunity, the Board of Education members, me as superintendent, to participate in an upcoming professional development through the Monroe County School Boards, which will be held on July 26th. There will be two sessions, one an afternoon session and then one an evening session. The hold the date with that information was sent out. We just received registration information today, and so Dolores and I will be working with all of you who are interested in attending that professional development opportunity to help you get registered. I was also asked to give an update related to school reopening and special education services as part of a larger conversation around summer programming. So summer is always a very busy time of year. I think contrary to what many think, it's actually maybe the busiest time in a school district, because we get our students graduated, we go through the ceremony, in this case, ceremonies, about 10 of them, and then we automatically move into a mode where we're preparing for the upcoming school year. So summer tends to be very busy in terms of getting our buildings ready to accept students for September. In many cases, providing professional professional development opportunities for teachers, writing and revising curriculum, planning programming, hiring, and making sure that our students and their families are supported as we start a new school year. So I will say this, this year has felt a lot more typical in terms of our preparation. We are planning to be fully staffed. Despite staffing shortages, which I'm going to speak more specifically about throughout the course of the update, we're in pretty good shape as far as hiring teachers. However, there are some other positions that we're concerned about. I do believe that while we've seen staffing shortages across the board this summer, I am confident that we will see some improvement as we head into fall. As far as readying our buildings, again, we're in the process of cleaning, getting furniture back into our physical spaces. We anticipate, even though we haven't seen any guidance from the state, that there will be some requirements around cleaning and disinfecting in addition to what we would typically do. We have planned for that, but again, we'll have to see what comes out from the state. And I think at the elementary level, especially, that could impact the amount of furniture that we're able to put into classrooms, because we will have to adhere potentially to certain distancing requirements. And also, one of the shortage areas that we are experiencing is with cleaners. And so we need to be cognizant of that and what's going to be expected, anticipating that there will probably be some additional requirements related to cleaning and disinfecting. From a curriculum and instruction point of view, I mentioned earlier that this is typically the time when we bring teachers together to write and in some cases rewrite curriculum, and so we're in the process of doing that this summer, especially in the areas of ELA and mathematics, to make sure that we are aligned to what's coming as far as new learning standards. We also, even though we haven't seen specific guidance from the state, we're in the process of planning for remote learning. I will say that I think that in many respects it might look a bit different than it looked this year. At its peak, our Remote Learning Academy held over 1,600 students. To put that in perspective, I was superintendent of a district before I came here in Solvay that had about 1,500 kids in it. So we staffed it and scheduled it like it was its own district because it needed to be done that way. And I think there were real benefits to the way that was set up, even though I mentioned in previous conversations with the board that it did present some challenges as far as staffing went, and Dr. McHugh could attest to that. He would be more than willing to talk about those challenges that it presented. But I think ultimately, that was an area that when I looked around the county, I think that was a real feather in Rush-Henrietta's cap. It wasn't done perfectly, but I think that we did it better than most. And quite honestly, regardless of what's required, I think that it's something that we should try to look to continue in some way, shape, or form. One, because it worked for students. Not all students, but many students it worked for better than in-person instruction. And I also think when we look at the long-term vision of the district in terms of what we want to accomplish technology-wise, in terms of what we want to accomplish, especially at the secondary level with offering blended learning opportunities and more student choice, which is something that we heard over and over again when I met with students at the very end of the year. I think that there's a real opportunity there that would be missed if we're not required to do it and then we just put it to the wayside. Our initial numbers when we surveyed families at the end of the year had approximately 180 families saying that they would definitely or probably request a remote option. And so we are in the process of of making sure that we have the infrastructure there to provide a remote learning option, even though some of the details are still in the works. And there is, you know, some additional information that we'll need from the state in terms of requirements, in terms of what we're authorized to do that, you know, we'll need in order to fully be in a place where we can finalize those plans. And then the last thing that is noteworthy instructionally is that we are in the process of meeting with principals. This is something that we do every year in terms of our school improvement planning process. So as you know, every school, regardless of accountability status, develops a school improvement plan that is aligned with our district priorities. And so Dina and I meet with principals 3 times a year, once at the very beginning of the year in the fall to help them develop the plan. We meet again in the winter as a way to monitor the plan, and then we meet at the very end of the year to look at, you know, finalizing the plan, at least from, or bringing, I should use different words, to bring closure to the plan and to look at an opportunity with the upcoming school year to identify things we might need to improve, but then also look at those achievements within each school. So that's happening right now. As far as student and family services, I think it's important to note that we have plans in place to support student mental health, which also is a district priority. And you know, we talked about it at our last meeting, but we're happy to have a partnership this year with the University of Rochester that's going to help us provide services for students in grades K through 6. And we'll continue our partnership with the Healing Connections, with the Healing Connection in grades 7 through 12. So as I said, you know, it's our intention to open fully. That's what we're planning for. You know, our focus has been around welcoming students back and preparing to get back to a more typical school situation for all families, 5 days a week, in-person instruction. And that's where our focus should be. So I think the rub here is that we haven't received guidance from the State Education Department or the State Department of Health as of yet. That's something that we've been advocating for this spring, since we were able to bring students back and open our doors fully K-6. You know, we asked very early on that we get implementable guidance in a timely manner, but that hasn't come yet. We did, many of you probably saw the guidance that we received from the CDC, which I thought was optimistic in many ways. I thought that it was optimistic that they are prioritizing full school reopening. I found it optimistic that the guidance was written in such a way, especially related to distancing, because that's what we're paying the closest attention to, because, you know, depending on what happens with distancing, that has the potential to be a deal breaker for school districts, depending on how that's written. They used words like recommending 3 feet of distancing as opposed to requiring. So I found the way that the document, the way that it was written, I find it to be hopeful and reason to be optimistic there. And they also mention several times throughout that document the potential ability for decisions to be made at the local level, which is what we've been asking for. And certainly when those decisions are being made, again, mentioned in that document, I think that vaccination rates and infection rates, community infection rates, will play an important part in those decisions and ultimately our ability to reopen. Now, having said all that, the guidance that was issued by the CDC is not regulatory. We have to take direction from New York State. So what we are advocating for is, again, guidance from the state so that we can plan and know exactly what's going to be expected of us in September. And so Monroe County Superintendent sent a letter to the governor in June. We'll be sending another letter to the governor this week to advocate for that guidance, because what we need to see is if there's going to be alignment between what's expected at the state level and what came out of the CDC. The last time comprehensive guidance was issued for schools was around the time this spring that most schools open more fully. And in many ways, that guidance is obsolete because there's no executive order sort of governing things like masking and things of that nature. So in some respects, when you look at the way that we have board meetings here tonight, or a typical workday, especially with employees who aren't working with students, or those districts that are housing day camps, we have a bit more flexibility with masking. However, if you're hosting an academic program in school and it involves students, then those masking requirements, even though there is debate around how they should be implemented, the guidance is still very similar. So you could have a situation where you have a day camp across the hall from a school-based instructional program with very different requirements, which again underscores the need to have very clear guidance for reopening. As far as masking during the fall, which again is something that people are asking about, one of the things that is, for those of you that have read the document, that is discussed several times in the CDC guidance is recommending that if someone is vaccinated, that masking is optional and a personal preference, but if someone is unvaccinated, that they continue to remain masked when indoors. And so we'll have to wait and see what the requirements look like, again, from New York State related to masking in the fall. But again, I think vaccination rates, I think infection rates within each respective community will play a really important part in some of the local decisions that are made. Related to summer school staffing, shifting gears a little bit here.
Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Wright, before you shift gears from reopening, can I pose some questions based on what you just asked?
Yeah, why don't we do this? Why don't I finish the overview, because we're talking...
Oh, I thought you were shifting to something else.
Yeah, I sort of, I'm going to talk about everything together because they're sort of interlinked in many respects.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
And then we'll, if there are comments or questions from the board, then we'll go from there. So with some of these issues related to masking and distancing over the summer, and as we look ahead to reopening, one of the things that has played a part in what we've been able to offer, both now and as we look forward to the fall, it centers around staffing. So I mentioned that, the staffing shortage is real. That's something that all school districts are experiencing, not just here in Monroe County, but across the state. People have asked why. Based on the information that we've received, I think it really centers around people needing a break. I think in education, there is a sense of COVID fatigue, if you will. I do think, though, that we will see improvement heading into fall. Some of the same struggles that we've had in hiring folks over the summer, I think we will see improvement, and I don't think it will have the impact on program that we've seen over the course of the past few weeks. Having said that, I am worried about certain positions, one of them being bus driver positions. That was always, a difficulty for school districts prior to the pandemic. I think during the pandemic, at its worst, we were probably a little over 30 drivers short. This doesn't sound like good news, but it actually is. I think we're, about 15 short right now, which is back to where we are, or back to where we were prior to the pandemic. And we do seem to be getting a little bit more traction in terms of being able to get people in for those positions, but I do anticipate that we will be short. I do anticipate that, as it has in past years, have an impact on the amount of time that students have to spend on buses. And I think that, there is going to be a lot of competition to fill those vacancies across the county and even across the state. With positions like paraprofessionals or cleaners, those are also areas where we are seeing shortages. And again, there's the potential for some of that to spill into hiring for the fall. But the shortage is real. Again, it's an area, it's not just specific to the area of education. It's something that we're seeing across all areas of the economy, not just in New York State, but nationally, and I'm sure that you've read about some of that. Specific to special education services, which have been talked about this evening, and also questions have come up about how the shortage is impacting our ability to offer special education services this summer. There certainly has been an impact. Despite the fact that we were able to expand the ESY program to almost 100 students this year. That's about a 20% increase of where we typically are. We invested an additional $140,000 in that summer programming. So, as I talked about before, this hasn't really been a money issue. It's been more of a human capacity issue. And so I do want to commend the special education team, because I think that they've done a good job maximizing the internal capacity that we have, but then also in some cases reaching out externally and looking at our community partnerships to fill some of those vacancies and provide services. But having said that, we are still short, especially in the area of speech and language services. We're continuing to try and find ways to provide those services, but we anticipate that there may be a situation, at least with some of our students, where we have to provide compensatory services this fall. And so I'm going to just ask Nerlan to speak to that particular issue a little bit more specifically.
No, I think you did a great job summarizing overall where we are at. We had talked briefly about it at the last board meeting, and like you said, speech and language and OT are the areas where we're a little bit short right now, in particular speech and language, but OT, we're close. We are anticipating that right now we will need to make up 1 week of services for all students attending ESY for OT. But the rest, like physical therapy, music therapy, vision therapy, those are 100, but we are in 100% compliance, so all of the students are receiving their services. But right now, we have 77 students who need speech language, and we only have 2 full-time speech language person. So that's where we're at, and we've reached out to BOCES, we've reached out to other partners, and it's been difficult. Our OT, there was none, and so we got, I believe, 1 internal person, and then we contracted with Liberty Post and Bright Start Pediatrics recently. And again, we waited to the last minute about related service to send the letters, because we were still hitting the pavement running to try to make sure that we can give parents good news instead of saying we can't. We like the word we can rather than we can't, and so we finally had to send a letter, and then the next day tell them that we were able to obtain some OT services. But overall, we wanted to have a robust ESY summer program. We wanted to have it 5 days in person, and unfortunately, due to the shortage of staffing, we had to go to a hybrid model for K-6 and virtual as well for 7-12. And still providing some support with related services instead of none.
I'm sorry, I missed the last thing you said about virtual services.
I said still providing, virtual, we providing virtual special class for students in grade 7-12 are all virtual, but for K-6 we're in a hybrid model.
All the related services, are those in person?
Some are in person and some are provided on line as well.
What's the mix of that?
I can get that information for you. I have a report that has 15 pages on it, so if you need the specifics, I can definitely send that.
Yeah, thanks, I'd love that report.
So that's what I would say, based on our overview. If there are questions that the board has that we can answer readily tonight, then we're willing to do that. But if collectively the board has an interest in certain information that we're not able to provide tonight, then we would provide that information in writing to the entire board at a later date.
I have a question after Rachel does.
No, go ahead, please.
Some learning moments with our synchronous, asynchronous, online learning for students with special needs. Did you see any or glean any wisdom out of that? For example, students with, say, anxiety, did they perform much better? Was any of that data looked at? And if it was, and it was a success, is it something that we're thinking about doing in the future? Because again, that could affect graduation rates and create some success stories for our families.
Yeah, I'll say this, and then I'll let Dina speak to it a little bit. Most of the information that I received was more anecdotal. I think there were some real success stories with certain students who really excelled with that type of a model. As I said before, there were many students right here in this building who, when I met with them, along with Dr. Schaefer, talked about the benefits of being able to learn in that way and to have more flexibility with their time and to have more choice, and some of the accommodations that teachers made throughout the course of the year in terms of being proactive with providing the course syllabus or providing some flexibility with when assignments were due, being able to use resources and things of that nature. That came out, in conversations I had in this building and as well as Roth. I will also say that I received feedback from parents around the struggles that some students had with, being able to have the agency and the independence to sort of manage their own learning in that environment, especially with older students. And I do commend the high school folks and the junior high school folks who had to drag some students into the building to make sure that they were getting work done and to take some extra measures. So I think it was based on the information that I received, a bit of a mixed bag, but to say that, it didn't work for any students, I would say that's inaccurate. I would say that there were a number of students that really excelled within that model. So I think that what I'd like to see us do going forward is to capture the elements of those models that really worked for kids and for families, and to try and look at as far as, the vision for the district in the next 5 years, recognizing that we've always wanted to be a leader when it came to how we utilize technology with learning. Is how do we create those blended models and those opportunities for kids to utilize technology in a way that's meaningful and connects them to the world in a different way. So I don't know, Dina, your thoughts?
I think you covered that very well, Superintendent Wright. We are in the process of looking at all our achievement data. However, the achievement data varies quite a bit this year because not all students participated in state assessments. So we do have our local assessments we have looked at, as well as our NWA MAPS data that occurs at the K-6 level. And there is no rhyme or reason who performed better, who did not. But to answer your question, Doug, the coordinators have reported to me when we're starting to look down at the special ed data, there are some students, you refer to the anxiety, or students that need to have like more movement that we can't always accommodate in a classroom setting, and also different modalities that you use in a virtual setting opposed to an in-person setting that some kids did benefit from. When we start looking at this over the next month or so and looking at the data with the various schools, and we did do a program evaluation of the remote learning program, we will have some variations of achievement data to look at. However, we're going to have to be very cautious when we look at them because we don't have a measurement consistent to compare them to, since not all students took assessments and some of our assessments were varied due to the nature of the hybrid and remote learning. For example, at 7th and 8th grade, we did not give the MAPS assessments to all students this past year because they usually take up about 9 days of instruction throughout the school year. In a hybrid model, we didn't want to lose that instructional time. So we only gave the MAPS assessments at 7th and 8th grade to students in academic intervention services so we could closely monitor them in design interventions. So we have assessment data to look at, but there's so many variables and nothing is consistent to be able to compare to previous years that we have to be very open-minded and really rely on the anecdotal notes that we're looking at too and look at each individual student. And that's why when we move forward and, we want to be prepared to offer a remote model, especially if the state requires us, but also to know if it's left to a local decision, there are some performance indicators and profiles of students that may have benefited that it might be creating the right condition for learning for those particular students. And we can continue to look at how to offer that. You've heard me say before, hats off to our teachers. You heard some students speak to remote learning this year as part of the presentation. And we were in a good position, to offer our instruction remotely because our teachers have done such a good job over the years being prepared for this. However, this put us in hyper mode and we learned a lot this year. So as Bo said earlier, it wasn't perfect. Some kids did struggle, especially with engagement. We know who those kids are, so if those would be students choosing remote again, we would have serious conversations with the parents and the students to really think about how we help them. And, at the secondary level, I've been conversations with Dr. Schaefer that we could do a little bit of a mixed bag too, that some kids might choose to take a couple courses remotely or take opportunities of our civics, economics, and health online courses, as well as taking some things in person if we don't have to worry about the safety and health mandates and we look at the staffing issues. So a lot of details that we've really been working over the last 2 weeks and trying to put forth, not knowing what the state requirement is. So we're trying to plan for the optimal and knowing that unless there are state regulations, that's going to cause some hindrance to be able to offer obviously the in-person typical school year, but no, there could be some opportunities for remote learning when it does play in. So looking at the data, looking at the kids that did benefit, we can craft and start personalizing learning opportunities for them.
So we will be collecting information this year then that would be more precise?
Absolutely. And we do have some from last year, Doug, but when you have these variables, you can take some insight from it, but I wouldn't make firm decisions from it. I think it can help guide us this year. As I shared with my cabinet colleagues today, we really want to put a conceptual design to print this year, thinking about how we learn from it to have a blueprint for the future. Last year, we had to develop it in crisis mode. We learned from that crisis mode, and again, I know there's teachers out here, hands off to our teachers. They did a phenomenal job, and our students responded beautifully, and the parent engagement piece was phenomenal. Parents were involved in supported learning, and for so many years we've been looking for that, and we had that this year. So this year, knowing that we want to be prepared to still offer it, especially if we have to, and if it's left to a local decision, we will think about how best to do that so that the numbers will be smaller is what we're anticipating, and hopefully we can help people craft based off of learning profiles who would benefit from it, so then we can take this conceptual design this year and have some more reliable data and models to learn from, and then to be able, like mid-year in the spring, to say, okay, here's our blueprint on how we move forward.
Perfect, thank you.
Can I just say one thing? I hope, when I hear you use the word data, I get a little nervous because as a teacher who did hybrid and remote and teaching, data can be so skewed. I mean, I gave an NWEA and had to call the mom to have the child stop rolling on the bed. I mean, during the NWEA. I mean, so I hope that we're given some leeway with the data, and I hope that once the students are in person, we can truly assess and see what they need, because the data that we got during the school year, some of it I would throw out in the wash.
And that's what I'm saying. The
Yeah.
variables are so many now. What we're more concerned about is looking at individual student performance, especially this fall when they come back, when we give our assessments. It's what we call universal screeners to get a baseline on students.
And then we can assess where
Yes,
they're at.
and then
see where they're-
decide. Really, we're going to have to spend the first month of school re-anchoring our students, giving our our assessments, but also really relying on our teachers and what they're seeing with the students, in addition to any formal universal screener that we have to give.
And also
And
giving
then we'll
them-
make some informed decisions. So as far as doing some more intensive, high-impact remediation, it probably won't occur till a little bit more into October or November once you have a better handle. For as many of our students who've been remote and then come back in person, they might catch on and start responding very quickly. So we got to really be able to assess that first couple weeks of school and get a better handle. And teacher observation, parent input, and how kids are responding are going to be more important than data we collected last year.
And especially giving them time to set up rituals and routines, because, I mean, they might have a child that hasn't been to school since, what, March 13th? I mean,
Absolutely.
so giving the child acclimated to the room, getting used to sitting down again, getting used to calendar time or story time or whatever, that's going to be a huge thing. Setting up rituals and routines, I mean, it could last a little longer than.
I think one thing we need to remember is we've been through a huge disruption the last
Right.
year and a half, as most importantly, our students, our staff members, us as a community. And when we come back to this typical school year, we need to be patient with one another, be patient with our students, give them a chance to get acclimated again, get our teachers and students a chance to bond, get school cultures up and going again, and systems and routines. And then, obviously, the academics are our number one priority, but if you don't have that safe, caring, nurturing environment, you can't succeed in the academics. So we have to go slow at first to be able to go fast when we get up and going later in this school year. We will be giving assessments. I mean, the assessments help inform how best to use our time. The worst thing we could do is think everybody didn't grow over the last year and a half, and feel like you have to repeat everything. We need to measure where every kid is so that we can really look at more individualized, personalized instruction. That's where technology does help us, even in an in-person setting. And some of the resources we have now, we've been using. At the elementary example, the Zern online platform can help differentiate and give interventions and help teachers that when they're working with other kids, students are doing some more personalized learning. So we've learned a lot. And when you know better, you do better. And I think that this little disruption in education has helped us modernize how we're going to teach so that our kids are learning very similar to the world that they live in and that we're preparing them for. So as much as we're going to go slow, when you take a deep breath, and I know everyone's on that COVID fatigue that Superintendent Wright referred to, I also think there's a lot of motivation that we should be looking forward to then when we come back, and I know our teachers are going to be excited, and the kids are going to be happy to be together again, and I'm looking forward to really thinking about how we improve instruction based off what we learned over the last year and a half.
Thank you.
Dina, thank you very much for that information. It made me feel better about what we just talked about, because I have some concerns, and I'll get into those in a second, and appreciate the fact that you talk about patience, and that's one of the things that I would take a step back and say to the board, or challenge the board, that we have to communicate patience to the community, because in September, let's say we're back in the classroom 5 days a week, people are going to have forgotten about what we've been through and expect immediate action and results, and that's not possible in this environment, because it does take time to identify those. And that gets to what my one question for you, Mr. Superintendent, is regarding the social and emotional contracts that you talked about early on in the presentation. My concern is that we have some set up right now. Every other district across the state, across the country, is going to be looking for these supports. How do we know, or is there a way that we could, and this may not be answerable this evening, so I'm not looking for that, is there a way that we can position ourselves best to be able to provide as much of those resources as possible? You talked about 2 different agencies that I think we've contracted with at this point. Is there others that we should be looking at as well, of almost having standby contracts? Because day one, when those kids hit the classrooms, there's going to be issues that are easily identifiable, but it's going to be day 15, day 30, when everybody's going to be fully employed dealing with social and emotional issues from a contracts perspective. we don't have enough staff to be able to address that. Never will, never anticipated to be able to address that. Is there anything in your world or your envisioning that we could potentially be looking at to spend some of the resources that were provided to us in some of these stimulus monies to position ourselves really well from that perspective? And before you answer that, I do want to make 3 comments and that came through loud and clear to me. The staff, regardless of what they're doing in this district, has done a phenomenal job over the last 16 months or however long it's been. You know, we talk a lot about teachers and what they've done, and certainly my hat is off to all of them and the struggles that they've been through. And listening to Jennifer and having a conversation with Jennifer earlier today, it's like, I get it, Jennifer. The summer needs to be yours because as a professional teacher, you need to regroup to be ready for September 1. I want you to be in that spot as we move forward. But to your point of identifying those other positions that are extremely important in the educational process that we don't think about a lot, bus drivers being one of them. That's near and dear to my heart. Apologize for that, but I'll throw that out there tonight. But cleaners and those type of staff positions, that they're going to be hard to find. We know that today. So, you know, whatever support the board can do from that perspective, your leadership in the district is extremely important, but also you referred to we a couple of times, and I don't think you explained the we part of it. Your leadership as far as the superintendents go in this county and this state is extremely important for us to be on the cutting edge of understanding what's coming out of Washington, Albany, and Monroe County so that we can react quickly to it and pull together whatever special meetings we do need to have in order to do that. And I commend you for the efforts that you're doing there. And the last thing I'm going to ask, please, the use of acronyms around this table is unbelievable. And I know I got a glossary of a lot of them, but there was a few in the last half an hour that I just like immediately went right over the top of my head. So I will stop you in the future regarding that, but if we could try to pull that back, maybe even just a little bit for some of us new board members.
I second that motion,
that.
Scott, yes.
You know what, Scott? And Dina can attest to that. I'm usually very good about recognizing that when we're putting, like this time of year, when we're putting together, you know, the year-end reports for the district priorities or like school improvement planning, they can attest to the fact that I'm always a stickler about, you know, making sure like you're going to have people that are not educators reading these documents, and so we have to spell it out and put it in parentheses. I'm not so good about it when we're having conversations, so I apologize, and I'll be better about that. I think you raise a lot of really good points. As far as I'm trying to go back through and kind of take them piece by piece, but some of the things I do want to address, I think it's been, at least in my time here, a struggle to find outside partnerships in support of student mental wellness, especially at the elementary level. So we are very excited about the U of R partnership. I think that we have a lot of internal capacity, and I think that the leadership of Diane Wynn, the addition of that position, I give the board a lot of credit because they were adamant that we had that position a few years ago and make it full-time and make that investment. I think, you know, that position has been so valuable in terms of, I think, providing a strategic direction for the district in terms of how we support students and in some cases staff with mental wellness. But I think that we always should be in pursuit of those community partnerships that are going to benefit our kids and benefit the districts, and so we'll continue to do that. And we also are in a very unique position, a position that I don't think you know I've ever been in as a superintendent, and probably that we've ever been in as a school community, where we have a lot of resources behind us right now. And we're excited about what we can do with them, and that's something that we are going to be talking with the board about more as we approach the upcoming school year, is some of the investments that we'd like to make in terms of intervention for students, especially, creating a model to support students, in some cases outside of the school day. I think we have an opportunity to sort of seed that initiative and then look for grant funding in the meantime to sustain it. I'm excited about conversations that we started related to innovation classrooms. If you'll remember, prior to the pandemic, we're in a position where we can continue those talks. Well, it's actually beyond talking now. We have pilot programs happening across the district. And so going back to some of the points that Mr. Rivers raised earlier, where we're trying to look at how we connect to students in different ways, especially utilizing technology, but then connecting it to a bigger conversation just around giving students choice and looking at how we support student needs individually. I think that we have an opportunity to do that, and that's pretty exciting. I will say, you mentioned advocating at the state level, advocating at the local level. We are going to be, I shouldn't say we, I am going to be giving a press conference tomorrow in the district office building to some local news channels, talking about a lot of the issues that we're discussing tonight that people are interested in. What is reopening planning looking like? What are some of the barriers? What are your impressions of what you saw with the CDC guidance? What are you anticipating as far as masking? How will vaccination rates, impact school reopening, things of that nature? How are you supporting students academically and socially, emotionally as we approach a new school year? So I think that folks are very curious about this, but I got to say, I feel really good about where we are in terms of reopening 5 days a week. I think the stressful part of it is, some people have asked, why haven't you put anything out? And the reason is because there's nothing more to tell. We're approaching this like we would have approached a school reopening prior to the pandemic. But I do think, we have to acknowledge that the wild card is that we haven't received the guidance.
And Mr. Wright, I'm sorry to interrupt, but that is my primary question on school reopening, what you just hit on right there. So I'd just love you to spin that out a little bit more. When you say that we're planning for, this has been sort of typical type reopening. So do I understand that as we can fully bus students? Students can be sitting in desks in the size classrooms that are our target size classrooms, and students can engage in, without cohorting, all of their various classrooms and things like that. Is that, even if we don't get guidance, can we achieve the typical school today?
So that's what we're planning for. And like I said, I was encouraged by the CDC guidance, because when you read through that, there was nothing in there, I shouldn't say nothing, but there wasn't much in there that from an operational perspective, from a logistics perspective, when we're planning for reopening, that I felt like that's going to kill our ability to reopen fully. Because of the way, I mentioned how it was worded, like I have been most concerned about distancing. And the way that it's worded in that document is a recommendation for 3 feet, and they use words like when applicable or when possible. So I do feel like, even at the high school where we ran into some, you mentioned like cohorting, which is practically impossible at the high school level because of the way that the schedules work here and movement throughout the building. If the guidance is anything close to what we saw in the CDC guidance, like I said, I feel very confident in our ability to reopen fully. And so that's what we're preparing for.
And so if no new guidance is issued, we can bus everyone to school, yes or no?
I'm going to ask Andy to weigh in here, but I would say that, when we brought everyone back, at least at the elementary level, and we were able to put 40 students on a bus, that we were able to accomplish that, but I'm going to have you weigh in.
And that was with 1,600 students in remote learning?
Correct. Yeah, our belief is we can, and the masking, the disinfecting protocols will still be in place. But our belief is that distancing, we have flexibility because of the way it words, and if that's the case, then it'll be a normal school year.
60 kids on buses?
Up to 60.
Up to.
It's unusual we have
Right.
60,
We
but
typically
there
don't
are
have
some
that many students.
neighborhoods that
Right.
that could be that high. I mean, most buses are much lower than that, but there are some neighborhoods, especially on the west side with the new developments where there's lots and lots of kids that, yeah, that's what we're planning for.
At the senior high, up to 25 kids in the classroom? Yes? No?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, some of the exercises that we had to go through in terms of our planning last spring led us to the conclusion that, if the distance, even if there was a requirement for 3 feet of distancing, which I hope it's a recommendation as opposed to a requirement, which provides us a little bit more flexibility, that in most of our classroom spaces, we would be able to accommodate that. The way that the guidance was written in terms of transportation, even last spring provided us with some flexibility. I can't foresee a scenario where they would make it more restrictive than it was last spring. My disclaimer, though, is always, I've been wrong a lot throughout the course of this pandemic in terms of trying to guess. One of those examples being, when we put out a reopening plan and 24 hours later, the state came out with guidance which flew in the face of that. I think we're in a different place right now, and I think there is a true commitment to helping schools to fully reopen. You saw that in the wording in the CDC document, and I think that New York State hopefully will follow suit.
And by my questions about, are we ready to go for typical school, by the way, I don't mean to gloss over the very real safety protocols that should still exist, given whatever the infection rate is, whatever health officials say about the variant. So I don't want to at all give the impression that I don't want us as a district, to follow whatever the best practices are to keep kids safe, especially before there's universal vaccination. And I understand, some families may choose not to do that, or for some students, it may not be medically advisable. And, those decisions certainly, I believe, are respected. I just want to make sure that there are no real impediments that we see right now that we shouldn't be planning to get over in some way, shape, or form. And what I'm hearing from you is, no, we don't have these impediments in front of us, except for if guidance comes out that is unfavorable to the typical school plan, then we would need to adjust accordingly. Am I right in that, in my understanding?
Exactly.
Okay, thank you.
Well, and thinking about the buses and remote learning, do you think that'll be a part of the plan where the two could converge to be efficient, meaning there'll be a remote learning option so that the busing, the shortage of buses and drivers could be managed, or do you think that's not realistic?
I think it helped us, you mentioned that we had over 1,600 kids at a certain point that were not being bused to school. That did help us last year. I just don't anticipate that we're going to get any numbers that are close to that. The initial survey of families, we had about 180 students who said that they would probably or definitely want a remote option. So in this case, I don't know that would help us. But like I said, I think the guidance that was one area where it was written somewhat flexibly. And like I said, I don't foresee a scenario with busing where they would put more restrictive guidance in there than they put last spring, because the infection rate is so low right now in this region and within New York State. I think that that's going to be taken into consideration, and the vaccination rate is so much higher.
Thank you.
I have questions about summer-related services, but I definitely want to make sure there's airspace for anything else on school reopening. Okay, so Nirlanda, I appreciate the fact you've got your 15-page report, so let's just see what maybe
What's
you
in
can
there?
help check off.
Okay.
How many students are we serving with summer-related services? How many are we supposed to serve?
So when we talk about related service, we're talking about speech and language
Yes.
therapy, OT.
Yes.
Right now, speech and language therapy, 77 students. Occupational therapy, 37. Physical therapy, 31. Music therapy, 4. Vision therapy, 2.
And some of those are overlapping, right? One student might require
Might
four.
have, correct, but there's still a service that has to be provided.
Okay. How many of those are getting all of their summer-related services?
Right now, like I said, physical therapy, music therapy, vision therapy, 100% compliance. That means they're getting whatever service that is stated on their IEP. With occupational therapy, we're at least at about 90% compliance. And like I said before, we will probably need to make up 1 week of services for all students who are eligible for OT services for the summer, just because right now we do not have the capacity to provide it all. For speech therapy, we are a little bit lacking. We're at 65% compliance right now. And so that's where we anticipate that we'll have to make up a lot of compensatory services in the fall.
And sorry, that last service was what?
Speech and language.
Speech and language.
Yeah, that's where
65.
there's many, because there's 77 students eligible for that.
Okay, so that's roughly 25-ish students who aren't getting it this summer.
Well, they're getting some form of it. So let's say they needed 2 times 30. Let's say they had 1 to 2 sessions, or 2 sessions per week. Instead of 2 sessions per week, they might be receiving 1 session per week right now.
Okay. Was everyone offered the option for in-person services? All of those, you had mentioned there's some are virtual, some are in-person. Was everyone provided the opportunity for in-person?
Which one, related service or program?
Sorry, related service.
Related services, like I said, it's one of those things that we needed to take a look at to see where we were with staffing. And so right now, I don't know specifically the numbers of those who are coming in, or a combination of those who are coming in or online, and that's the information that I said I will get for you, because you wanted the numbers of who was receiving it in person versus virtual, so I got to get that and break it down for you in terms of services like that.
Might I make a suggestion in terms of what might make the most sense, as opposed to some of these things that you're going to have to research further? If it's the want, again, of the board collectively to get more detailed information about summer services related to special ed, then we could provide you with a summary, something in writing for the whole board, because it sounds like, some of these questions are things that we're going to have to research a little further. So that would be my suggestion, that we provide you with a summary that hopefully, in a way that's more comprehensive, answers questions related to those particular inquiries, as opposed to, going through a scenario where we keep having to say to you over and over, well, we'll have to check on that and get back to you.
I don't mind that if it would, you have, Mr. Wright, the list of questions that I sent ahead of this meeting, and so I wouldn't mind a summary if that's responsive to those questions. Will it be?
Yeah, and again, I think if those inquiries are something that all of you collectively want us to take the time to research, then we're willing to do that. It might take us a little bit, but we'll make sure that if it's something that you all want us to answer, then we'll do that.
And I want to add to it, I think for some of us, maybe that the special ed population is dear and near to our hearts. We want to make sure we can help as much as possible, so being educated on those topics might be valuable to us. So I would appreciate it, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's where my head goes too, that it would be useful information for us to be able to consume. The only question I have is, as we talked about earlier, it sounds like we're going to do some sort of workshop at some point in time regarding special ed. I don't know the timing of how long it's going to take to pull all this information together. Is it something that we could just do it all together at that point? I don't necessarily know if that's timing-wise works from a perspective of being able to be responsive, but it certainly would give us some information moving forward.
If the board wants this information, then that's something that we could provide well in advance of when we would be scheduling a board workshop on special education.
My only concern about that is just, it's a live issue now that many families aren't getting all of the services they need. And I understand, and maybe the folks who have more personal knowledge or firsthand knowledge of receiving special education services can say so, but the families that I've heard from have said that it's really not a perfect substitute. It's actually a poor substitute to receive compensatory services, because that just sets your child further behind. So my desire in knowing as much as I can about summer-related services is to help, sort of uncover, are there other things that we could be doing? Are there other agencies that we could be reaching out to? Are we offering virtual services and people are turning that down, so they're not even making it to Nirlan's report, but because they just regard virtual services as a very poor substitute for the in-person related services that their kids need. And so in my frame of reference, waiting for a workshop at some point in the future to do a debrief of what the summer was like, on the one hand, would probably be really helpful. Yes, of course it would be really helpful. I assume Nirland is the acting special director of special education right now, because I know that position has been vacant for a very long time. So to the incoming person, I'm sure a debrief like that would actually be quite helpful. But to the families who need services today, that doesn't help them. And then when they get to the fall, I've also been told if they're offered 4 days of PT in the fall, they might say, no, I'll just take 2, I guess, because I don't want my child missing more instructional time. And so for many reasons, compensatory isn't enough. So front burnering this and doing everything, as poor Nirland is acting director of special education, doing everything now is, I think, crucial to those families.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I don't think anybody wants to be in a position where we have to offer compensatory services. I think, it's just an unfortunate situation that our district, like many other districts across the region, haven't been able to provide services. But what I can say is that Nirlan and her team are committed to shaking the bushes, so to speak, to find where we can get services for students this summer, so that we're not in a position where we have so many students that are going to be in that position where they have to resort to compensatory services. So, going back to the request, like I said, if the board is asking us for, specific information related to that, then we can certainly provide that this summer. But just know that it's not that this happened because of the way that we set our program up, or because of a lack of effort around securing services prior to. This is a situation that was unforeseen, and almost every district that I know of in the county is in a similar situation.
Well, just to maybe give you some information you don't have on that point. For example, I know that one of the agencies reached out to the district in advance asking if they would have need for a certain kind of service, and did not get a response until July 6th, when one of our employees reached out to them. So I'm saying that it may not be the case that we couldn't have planned a little better to have really beaten the bushes ahead of time. And I guess I don't agree with you that this was not foreseeable, because this was a heck of a year for everybody who worked in a school district. So, and I also don't begrudge anyone who says, I need the summer to recoup. So I would have, and I would hope an after action review would include, when folks should have reached out to these organizations to try to secure services.
Yeah, I'm not saying that the process couldn't be improved. I think what you'll find is that just about everything that we do here in this district. There's room for improvement, even though we do a lot of good work. But what I'm saying is I see it differently in terms of it being the fault of, you know, a poor planning or something like that. I don't think anyone 2 months ago anticipated how we knew that the window was tight. We knew that we had more resources to spend than we had in past summers, but I don't think anyone completely anticipated the way that the labor shortage would impact school districts. That's all that I'm saying. But I don't disagree with everything that you said, just some of the things.
I guess from my perspective, if there are questions that Rachel had provided that are, I'll refer to them as quick and easy answers, that might be really useful to get that out. And then whatever is sort of going to require a lengthy explanation, that would be something that we could cover in a workshop and really kind of get some immediate responses, and then ultimately understand the bigger picture of it, because I think that's where I'm lacking right now.
Sure, I see heads shaking, so it looks like I'll do a straw poll, and that looks like the majority. That's something that we can do. Just bear with us in terms of getting back to you.
Thank you.
That concludes the superintendent's report.
Thank you. Next up would be new business. Item 7A, there was a question about possibly putting it into executive session. Are you still wanting to do that?
So I'm I asked the superintendent, because this came up as an action pertaining to approval of a settlement, which was something that seemed to me that was a legal matter that I didn't have any advanced knowledge of. And the documentation that was attached to it didn't give me any more information, which I wouldn't expect it to. So he explained it to me in an email, but I'm still not exactly clear on what it is, because it doesn't come across in the resolution as being a tax matter. But if it is a tax matter, and someone can just tell me that that's the way the resolution reads for a tax matter, because I was a little bit surprised, only because I've seen them from the other side of it, and they're a little bit more specific than this one was. So that's where my confusion is right now.
Since I wasn't clear, I'm going to punt. I'm going to have Andy take a shot at this one.
Yeah, that was a tax certiorari case, and in general,
I'm totally fine then. If it's a tax certiorari case, I understand that and can be totally fine with it.
as you know, the town is responsible, and there are a rare occasion where we think we need to intercede, and then those cases we would discuss with the board in an executive session, but in general, the towns have the expertise and the responsibility to handle those matters, and we're just ordered to pay.
The resolution just didn't come across that way, so I apologize for putting you through that.
So I'm sorry, we are talking about item 7A?
Yeah, that's not what the 7A is.
It's not the tax.
It's not the tax certiorari.
No, this is an employment.
That's a personnel.
It's a personnel action. So you would need some more information, so I will make the suggestion that we move that to under executive session so that we can bring you up to speed with the information.
That'd be great
okay?
if that's
All right.
appropriate at this point.
All right. So
Just to be clear about then moving it into the, well, I'm sorry, I'll wait till we get there, because then I'll listen to what the motion is.
yeah, I'm going to get wording from George.
So was that your question?
Yeah.
And then I explained a different?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
The tax certiorari claim settlement? Yeah, I was like, we're being, that's, we're ordered to pay that.
Yeah.
Right, I'm sorry, yeah, I was explaining 4A.
I'm sorry, Scott, I'm just, this is a test, just so you know.
Acronyms.
You're passing.
It's that acronym.
That's acronyms, and you caught that. That was on purpose. Kidding.
Right.
Thank you for pointing it out.
I'm going to get some wording from George in a minute for that, but we do have another piece of new business, and it is the board quarterly report. That really is just for our information to look at, make sure that we're on target with our portion of the budget. We really haven't gone too many places this year, done too many things, so there should be no issues or concerns. Any questions regarding that, anybody? All right, That does not require any action. All right. So I'm waiting from George for my wording. So we're going to update the other one as well.
So you're looking for language on the executive session?
Yes, please.
Yeah, so you're going to be adding a discussion of the potential settlement of a pending division of human rights matter.
Yes, Dolores, didn't you receive from Karen the resolution regarding the settlement of the human rights claim?
The resolution is here, but it's not clear what it's about. I think that's what Scott's question is. So he wants some background on the resolution.
Or I can just abstain from it, which may be
Or
the
what?
easiest. I could just abstain from the vote, it might be the easiest, but
Well, no, I mean, that's fine, but it's a division of human rights matter. That's what,
Okay.
that doesn't jump out at you from the resolution.
thank you.
All right, so let me see if I can get this. I got a couple. So we're looking to go into executive session to discuss potential settlement of a human rights action and also to discuss negotiations with the RHA Teachers Chapter.
And just a point of order would be if there's any other board member or staff member who had it in their mind to raise anything else, rather than going there, hearing it, saying, oh, we got to come pop back out in the public session. I guess I would just, ask, let's be efficient and, try to
These are the
motion
only
it
two
now.
items that I'm aware of.
Nothing else here.
Okay, so I will take a motion for that wording of our executive session. Mr. Rivers, Mr. Adair. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? And we are now in executive session. We will, I guess we're going back down the hall then. Yeah. And you're very welcome to stay and wait. We will be out of executive session as soon as possible. The cabinet members, you don't need to wait for us. You may leave because our actions will not need any information from you.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Yeah.
No.
Totally asleep.
We're missing nobody.
Laura?
No.
Okay. Guys, we're back from executive session. We have just a couple more pieces to go. And we're going to return back to 7A, the action pertaining to the approval of a settlement. We've had our conversation, so I would entertain a motion to accept. May and Mrs. Jennifer. Okay. I'm just going to call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries 7-0. This will bring us back then to, we're going to do board meeting and recap and preview, but before we do that, I just want to remind everyone that we have also a professional development training on the 27th. Sherry Johnson from Monroe County School Board is coming. Then right after that, we'll be doing one of our first restorative circles. We have another one scheduled for August and another training with Sherry in September and a couple more restoratives. I just want to publicly say that I am really hoping through this training that we together will be hearing the same information about our roles and responsibilities. And then moving on to the restorative circles, I am really hoping that this will help us all grow, become more familiar with one another, and be able to build an effective governing team. We need to move forward for our children in this district, the students in our district, so that is my hope and my goal with all these trainings and circles. That is my piece for this evening. So, typically, Scott, we would have a board meeting recap, but I think Anne Marie's helping us.
Gave it to him.
Oh, good. Anne Marie was very kind to help him with that this evening, and we will have conversation more about responsibility.
I was going to acknowledge Anne Marie's assistance in this because
Everybody's
my
having
notes
to
are
do it.
nowhere near as good as this from that perspective. So I'll start at the top and work my way down, but all consent agenda items have passed, all board items have passed. A future meeting will be held to decide where to place the RFP process for professional services into policy so that we can then develop in from a timeline perspective, where that needs to take place during the year, and how that imports into the budget process. There is an opportunity for the Board of Education and the Superintendent for some professional development through the School Boards Association on July 26th. The information just came into the district today, but I think there was a afternoon and an evening session regarding that date to be on the lookout for. We will be amending the board calendar for our meeting in February from the 22nd to the 15th. Bo will be giving a press conference tomorrow on behalf of the Monroe County Superintendent's Group. And our next meeting is August 10th at 6 p.m. What did I forget?
It's good, it's good.
You forgot it was a great meeting tonight.
I did forget that, Doug. Thank you very much.
welcome.
And thank Anne Marie for giving me the notes for this.
Anne Marie, thank you for giving him something.
Everybody's happy she didn't have to do it.
All right, with that, I'll take a motion to adjourn our meeting. Anne Marie and Doug, okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you, everyone.
Well, what time?